welcome to Movie Central, the place to talk about movies, TV shows based on movies, toys based on movies, games based on movies, and rides based on movies. I'm your host, Mr. CCS, and on my lap is my pet gorilla, George. I love comic books. We all have our comic book heroes that we like to follow: Batman, Spider Man, the X Men, and even the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The very dark and dangerous characters that killed the villain in the first issue that later got adapted into a very lighthearted TV show reminiscent of the Hanna-Barbera cartoons we all grew up with in the 70s. Good times. But do you want to know what I love more than comic books? Comic book movies. Keep in mind that in the early days of cinema, comic book movies were nothing like they are today. But back in the 1980s, 90s, and the early 2000s and early 2010s, we got certain box office giants that are still loved mostly today. Films like Superman the Movie, Batman, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Blade, X-Men, Spider-Man, and the Dark Knight trilogy. But it wasn't until 2008 when we got a movie that would kickstart the biggest cinematic franchise of all time. I am, of course, talking about Iron Man. 2008's Iron Man tells the story of Tony Stark, played by Robert Downey Jr., a billionaire industrialist and genius inventor who is kidnapped and forced to build a devastating weapon. Instead, using his intelligence and ingenuity, Tony builds a high-tech suit of armor and escapes captivity. When he uncovers a nefarious plot with global implications, he dons his powerful armor and vows to protect the world as Iron Man. That's basically it. Seems like a pretty basic story, doesn't it? Well, you'd be wrong if you said yes. Not only does Iron Man have a great storytelling, but it perfectly, and I do mean it when I say it, perfectly embodies the origin story of a superhero. Say what you will about Batman Begins, Spider Man, Superman, and every other superhero origin movie, because this is by far the most interesting and also the best at the same time. The characters are great. Robert Downey Jr. as the invincible Iron Man, what can I say that hasn't been said about him? He's charismatic, charming, and overall heroic. He starts out as a greedy man who cares about his weapons and his money, and also creepily hangs out with women. Oh, Christ. But by the time he sees what his weapons can do about 30 minutes into the film, he changes into the hero we all know and love today. One of my favorite scenes of the film is when he sees the outcome of the terrorist attacks and what they are doing with his weapons. And then later on see him destroy the weapons so that no one can ever use them to harm anyone again. And when he suits up in each suit he has, it's visually cool. It makes me envy the technology, but more on that later. We also have other great characters. Rhodey, played by Terrence Howard in this movie, is stern and serious, but sometimes breaks that nature to please his friend. While Rhodey did go through a huge metamorphosis throughout the rest of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I do like where he starts out. Other characters who have similar arcs are Happy Hogan, played by the film's director Jon Favreau, and Pepper Potts, played by the surprisingly stunningly hot Gwyneth Paltrow. Yeah, you try saying that again. Happy is Tony's bodyguard who does what he is told. An example being when Tony returns from Afghanistan and demands that he be given a cheeseburger to hold a press conference, even though Pepper doesn't think that's the best idea. Happy is Tony's bodyguard, so he listens anyway. And then there's Pepper Potts. Now, in the comics, she ends up becoming the superhero rescue. However, she did start out as Stark's assistant. We do see that she cares for her boss, as she makes sure he makes it to his weapons demonstration on time. She cries when she hears he is safe. She persuades that he should go to the hospital as he received critical injuries. She helps him with his electromagnetic in his chest. when it needs to be replaced. She frames the original magnet after Tony told her to get rid of it, and she refused to overcharge the arc reactor in the building as she worried it would kill him. So, as you can see, she is a caring figure who will do anything for anyone in any situation, which makes her a very strong and independent female character. That's foreshadowing for the later movies. Now, you may be wondering about the villain. Certainly, there must be an awesome, well known baddie for our hero to face. Well, no. Your hopes are then crushed. Because this villain is none of those things. But surprisingly, he's still an awesome villain. Obadiah Stane starts out as Tony's predecessor, but is then revealed to be a greedy businessman who was in charge of the whole terrorist operation just to take control of Stark Industries. In the end, he builds a monstrous suit of armor based on Tony's original design, which almost ends up killing Tony. But thankfully, Stain ends up being killed by the arc reactor in a pretty gruesome yet satisfying kill that I'm not going to tell you about. You gotta watch the movie to find out. As for the other characters, they're minor characters and are not in it much. The only big one I can talk about is Ho Yinsen, played by Sean Tube. He's in about 10 minutes of the film as he helps Stark escape the cave in Afghanistan. When Stark's suit takes a long time to power up, Yinsen picks up a gun and goes out to buy Stark some time. About 2 minutes later, we see Yinsen filled with bullet holes and covered in blood. He then gives Stark the important lesson that is completed in the final film in the saga. That lesson is, don't waste it. Don't waste your life. His death was powerful, and his presence was strong from that point on. Now we get to the effects. They are amazing. From Tony Stark's suit to the action scenes to the sound effects, the people who worked on this movie really know how to create the best looking visual effects of the 2000s era. On the topic of action, there are so many great things and scenes. From the cold open with blazing and obnoxious gunfire to the scene where Stark comes out of the cave fully coated in his Iron Man armor, to the Battle of Golmira, to the final battle in LA, the action will leave you speechless and on the edge of your seat. And the accompanying music by Ramin Djawadi, who did the score of Pacific Rim and Game of Thrones, makes it better. So, what's my final verdict? Iron Man is not only one of the best superhero movies of all time, but it's also one of the best franchise starters of all time. It has an amazing lead, great characters, cool visuals, stunning action, and memorable moments that will definitely be remembered for many years to come. While there are better movies in the MCU, this is still in the top 5 best in the franchise. As I said, it perfectly embodies the origin story of a hero perfectly. And I'm going to give it a score, and I do mean a perfect score of a 10 out of 10. In short, this movie is a franchise starter that is so damn good. Well, that's my review for today. What are your thoughts on Iron Man? Please give me your opinion in the email below. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know, as it really helps this video ever-growing series. Also, tune in next week when I take a look into the sequel to Star Wars, that being Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. With that said, I'm Mr. CCS, you're watching Movie Central, and that, my friends, is a wrap. See you guys next time. Wait a second. Why is the light off? It shouldn't be off. Hello? I know that breathing.